The first time I noticed her, she was standing on her porch with a cardboard box in her hands. The box did not look heavy, but the way her fingers kept slipping along the edges made it look like it weighed far more than it should. I was standing in my yard clearing ivy along the fence line. I had been doing that for 3 days straight, trying to make my old fixer-upper look less like a disaster and more like a home. Every time I straightened my back to take a breath, I found myself glancing at the house next door. Her house. During those 3 days, I had not seen a single car in her driveway. Just her. Walking out to the mailbox, checking her phone, pacing on the porch, then slipping back inside like she did not want the world to see her for too long. But today felt different. She stood on the porch step, holding that box against her hip. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the quiet street. Her chin was lifted, and she wore a smile that looked like it had been carefully placed on her face. The problem was that the smile did not reach the rest of her. Her shoulders were tight. Her eyes kept darting down the street. Left, right, left again, like she was waiting for a car to appear and ruin everything. I set my head shears down slowly in the grass so she could see my hands were empty. Then I walked closer, stopping at the edge of her walkway. "Need a hand?" I called. My voice was not loud, but it carried across the quiet yard. She jumped anyway. Her head snapped toward me, dark waves of hair shifting across her shoulder. She looked like she was in her late 30s, the kind of polished beauty that usually comes with distance and confidence. But right now that polish had cracks in it. "I'm fine," she said quickly, lifting the box half an inch higher before her grip slipped again. "Just reorganizing." "I'm Jackson," I said, wiping dirt from my hands onto my gray shirt. "I just bought the place next door." Her eyes flicked toward my truck in the driveway, then back to my hands, then toward the street again. "I can help you move that," I added. "Got about 10 minutes before I have to head out." She hesitated. For a second I thought she might say no. Then she said something strange. "My husband's out of town." The words came out like a rehearsed line. She watched my face carefully as she said it. "He hates when things are moved," she added. "But I need to move the furniture today, before the weekend." It was Tuesday. The urgency did not match the calendar. She stepped down one stair, still holding the box. When she moved closer, I caught the scent of vanilla and clean laundry. She tipped the box toward me. "Here," she said, with a small, teasing smile that felt forced. "You can start with this." I took the box from her. Our fingers brushed for half a second. She pulled her hand back quickly, like the contact surprised her. "Thanks," she said, pressing that same hand along the side seam of her jeans, like she needed to steady herself. I nodded toward the road. "You waiting on someone?" Her eyes flicked down the street again. "No," she said too fast. I did not push. Instead, I shifted the box against my chest. "Where do you want it?" She let out a slow breath and opened the front door. "Living room." When I stepped inside, she stayed behind me and locked the door. Click. Then another click. The deadbolt. She kept her hand on the lock for a moment longer than necessary. The house felt strange the second I stepped in. Not cold from temperature, cold from design. Everything was expensive and perfectly arranged. Couch pillows lined up with perfect spacing. Furniture placed like someone had measured every inch. But the air felt stale. Trapped. "Over there," she said, pointing to the corner of the living room. I set the box down. Then she pointed again. In the center of the room sat a huge dark oak armoire. Old, heavy, solid wood, the kind of furniture that looked expensive but completely out of place. "That," she said quietly. "You want it moved?" "I want it out of this room." I walked around it slowly. "Garage or curb?" I asked. I don't care. She rolled up the sleeves of her white blouse. The shirt looked crisp but wrinkled like she had slept in it. I can help, she said. No, I told her calmly. You handle the doors. She hesitated, but nodded. I leaned the armoire forward carefully and slid a blanket underneath. As it tipped forward, the wall behind it came into view. A patch of fresh drywall sat at head height. Too new, too rushed. I noticed her staring at it. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers curled along the seam of her jeans, nails digging into the fabric. He bought that thing, she said quietly. Who? My husband. She said the word like it tasted bitter. He loved it. I pushed the cabinet slowly across the floor. It's ugly, I said. For the first time since I met her, she smiled for real. Quick, small, honest. It is, she said softly. She moved through the house, opening doors ahead of me. Every time we passed a window, she paused to glance outside before walking again. Like she did not want the house to see her moving things. When I reached the garage and set the armoire down, sweat ran down my back. When I came back inside, she was standing at the front window. She lifted the curtain slightly and checked the street, then dropped it. You should go, she said, without turning. She checked her watch. 5:45. And? He calls at 6. Her shoulders tightened when she said it. I stepped back toward the door. If you need anything, I said, I'm next door. She nodded once. Sharp, like agreeing hurt. That night I sat on my porch watching her house without really meaning to. At exactly 6 o'clock, her silhouette appeared in the kitchen window. She picked up the phone. Her posture was stiff and straight. One hand pressed against the counter. The other held the phone like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 20 minutes later, she hung up. Her shoulders dropped like she had been holding her breath the entire time. Then she looked straight toward my house, toward me. And for a moment, I had the strange feeling that she was not just noticing me, she was waiting for me. I tried to ignore the thought. But later that night, when the rain started falling and her lights stayed on, something in my chest told me the story between us was only beginning. The rain started just after 8 that night. At first, it was only a light drizzle tapping softly against the street. But the sky kept darkening, and soon the rain turned steady, pouring over the quiet neighborhood like a curtain. I was still sitting on my porch. My beer had gone warm in my hand, but I barely noticed. My eyes kept drifting back to Elena's house. Her lights were still on. Her shadow moved across the living room walls again and again, like she could not sit still. Something about the way she moved made my chest feel tight. It was not curiosity anymore. It was concern. After a while, I stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans, and walked down the steps. The rain soaked through my shirt before I even reached her yard. Her porch light glowed softly against the storm. The house looked peaceful from the outside, almost perfect. But I knew better now. I climbed the porch steps and knocked lightly on the door. 2 knocks. Then I waited. The door opened almost immediately. Elena stood there. Her hair was damp, clinging to the side of her face like she had stepped outside earlier in the rain. Her eyes looked tired, darker than before. But the moment she saw me, something in her expression softened. "Jackson," she said quietly. Her voice sounded rough, like it had been a very long day. "Everything okay?" I asked. Even as I said it, I knew the answer. She paused for a moment, biting her lip. Then she slowly shook her head. "I don't know what to do anymore." The words were barely louder than the rain behind me. Something inside my chest twisted. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked gently. She looked down at the floor for a long moment. "I don't think I can," she whispered. "Not tonight." I nodded. "That's okay. She stayed quiet for a moment longer, then said something that sounded more like a thought than a sentence. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." I stepped a little closer to the doorway, but kept my distance. "You don't have to do it alone," I said. The words came out before I had time to think about them, but they were true. She looked up at me then, really looked at me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she stepped aside. A silent invitation. I walked inside. The door closed behind me with a quiet click. This time, it did not feel like the house was closing around me. It felt like something was finally opening. We walked into the kitchen. Elena reached into the cabinet and pulled out 2 glasses. Then she poured wine into both without saying a word. She handed one to me. Her hands were steady now, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Tell me what's going on," I said softly. She leaned back against the counter and took a slow breath. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine," she said. "But I don't know how to leave either." I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence helps people say more. "He controls everything," she continued. "The house, the money, every little decision." Her fingers tightened around the glass. "I feel like I'm trapped." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. The sharp sound cut through the house like a knife. Elena froze. Her eyes widened, and the color drained from her face. "It's him," she whispered. My stomach tightened. "He's back." The doorbell rang again, louder this time. I set my glass down on the counter. "Stay here," I said. But she grabbed my arm for a second. Her hand trembled. "Jackson, it's okay," I told her. I walked toward the front door. My heart was pounding harder with every step. The doorbell rang again just as I reached it. I paused for 1 second with my hand on the knob. Then I opened it. A tall man stood on the porch, wearing a perfectly tailored suit. His posture was straight and confident. His smile was sharp, the kind of smile that felt more like a weapon. Behind him stood 2 movers holding equipment. "Well," the man said smoothly, "this is interesting." His eyes moved over me slowly before sliding toward the house behind me. "I should have guessed you'd already found someone else, Elena." I stepped outside and pulled the door halfway closed behind me. "Can I help you?" I asked calmly. His eyes narrowed slightly. "And you are?" "Jackson." He nodded once. "Richard." Of course he was. "What do you want?" I asked. He straightened his jacket. "I came to collect what belongs to me." Behind him, the movers shifted awkwardly. They looked like men who had been paid not to ask questions. "You're not taking anything," I said. Richard let out a soft laugh. "This is still my house," he replied. "And she's still my wife." I stepped forward slightly, blocking the doorway completely. "Not anymore." For the first time, his smile slipped, only for a second. Then it returned colder than before. "The furniture, Jackson," he said, waving a hand toward the house. "Move it outside. I'm taking it." I did not move. "You're not taking anything," I repeated. "Not without a court order." His eyes hardened. "You're a landscaper," he said quietly. "Do you really think you can stand in my way?" "I don't care who you are," I replied. My voice stayed calm. "What I care about is Elena." His jaw tightened. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I have paperwork," he said, holding it up. He waved it like it was supposed to scare me. I glanced at the paper and then looked back at him. "You think that changes anything?" For a long moment he stared at me. Then he dropped the paper at my feet. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "Maybe," I answered. "But you're not hurting her anymore." His eyes flicked toward the window behind me. He knew she was watching. His smile vanished completely. "Let's go," he said sharply to the movers. They did not argue. Within seconds, they were walking back toward their truck. Richard paused at the edge of the driveway. Then he looked back at me one last time. This time, there was no smile at all, just anger. Then he got into his car and drove away. The street fell silent again. I walked back inside. Elena stood in the hallway. Her arms were wrapped around herself like she was holding her body together. "He's gone," I said softly. She looked at me for a long moment. Then something inside her broke. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. For a second, I froze. Then I slowly wrapped my arms around her too. Her body trembled against mine. "You're safe," I whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." She did not say anything, but the way she held on told me everything. And in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was happening between us had just begun, and Richard was not finished yet. The house felt quiet after Richard left. Too quiet. Elena was still standing in the hallway when I walked back inside. Her hands were pressed against her stomach, like she was trying to hold herself together. "He's gone," I said again, softer this time. "For now." She looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes were full of emotions she had probably been holding in for years. Then she whispered, "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me," I said. But she shook her head. "Yes, I do." Her voice trembled slightly. "No one has ever stood up to him before." I did not know what to say to that. The thought of her living like that for years made my chest tighten. She stepped closer to me slowly, almost like she was unsure if she should. Then she wrapped her arms around me. This time, I did not hesitate. I held her. Her body was warm against mine, and for a moment the whole world outside that house felt very far away. "You're safe now," I whispered. "I'm not leaving." She did not speak, but she leaned into me like she believed it. That night, I stayed until she fell asleep on the couch. I covered her with a blanket before quietly walking back home. But things between us had already changed. The next few days passed slowly. Elena kept mostly to herself at first. I could tell she was still processing everything that had happened. But something about her had shifted. The tight tension in her shoulders was not as strong anymore. She moved through the house a little easier, like she was finally breathing again. Still, I noticed the way she looked toward the street every time a car passed. Old habits do not disappear overnight. During the day, I worked on building a new deck in my backyard. Every once in a while, I would glance over toward her house. Sometimes she was in the garden pulling weeds. Sometimes she stood in the kitchen window with a cup of coffee. We started talking more. Small conversations at first. She would bring me iced tea in the afternoon while I worked. We talked about flowers, the weather, and the terrible state of my lawn. Nothing heavy. But those little conversations slowly turned into something deeper. One Friday afternoon, I was measuring wood for the deck frame when I saw her standing at the fence. She was very still. Her hand rested on the wood rail, and her eyes were fixed on the sky. "Elena?" I called softly. She turned toward me. Her expression looked different, not scared, determined. "I'm leaving," she said. The words caught me off guard. "Leaving where?" I asked. "My sister lives in Denver," she said. "I think it's time I go there for a while." I felt something heavy drop in my chest. "You don't have to run," I said quietly. She shook her head gently. "I'm not running." Her voice softened. "I just need space to breathe. I need to figure out who I am without him controlling everything." I stepped closer to the fence. "You're not alone anymore," I told her. She looked at me carefully, like she was measuring those words. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed. "Maybe I won't go right away," she said slowly. "Maybe I just need a little time." I nodded. "Take all the time you need." After that day, things changed again. We started working together around the houses. We fixed the fence between our yards. We repainted her porch. We cleaned out the overgrown garden that had been ignored for years. Every small project seemed to lift a little more weight off her shoulders. Flowers began to bloom again in her garden. Lavender filled the air whenever the wind passed through the yard. One evening, as the sun was setting, we stood together looking at everything we had finished. The yard looked completely different now. Alive. "I think we did good," Elena said quietly. "We did," I replied. She stepped a little closer to me. "I spent so many years just surviving here," she said. "But now it finally feels like a place where someone could live." I smiled. "Then let's make it ours." She looked up at me. "Ours," she repeated softly. There was something powerful in that word. The weeks that followed felt peaceful in a way I had never experienced before. We worked on small projects together almost every day. New flowers in the garden, fresh paint on the fence, little lights hanging along the porch. Every change made the house feel warmer. One evening we sat together on the porch swing, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. The sky glowed orange and pink. Elena turned toward me slowly. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About everything." She looked down at her hands before meeting my eyes again. "For the first time in a long time, I feel safe," she said. My chest warmed at those words. "You deserve that," I told her. "You deserve peace." She smiled gently. Then she leaned forward and kissed me. It was not rushed. It was not desperate. It was quiet. A kiss built from trust and understanding. When she pulled back, her forehead rested lightly against mine. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. "I know," I said softly. "Neither am I." From that moment on, everything felt different. The house was no longer a place filled with fear. The yard that once looked abandoned was now full of life, and the two of us were building something together. Not fast, not perfect, but real. One evening, months later, we sat on the porch swing again. The stars had started appearing in the sky above us. Elena rested her hand in mine. "You know," she said quietly, "when I asked you to help move that furniture, I was terrified." I laughed softly. "I could tell. But that was the moment everything started to change," she said, "and I'm glad you knocked on my door that night." I squeezed her hand gently. "I'm glad you opened it." We sat there together in the quiet night. No fear, no tension. Just the sound of the wind moving through the garden and the feeling of her hand in mine. The house behind us was not just a house anymore. It was a home. Our home. And whatever the future held, we were ready to face it together.